really like to get him on. Rob, just give us a wave if you can. That's fantastic, Rob. We're going to get you on next.
I know a few Robs. Which Rob is this?
This is the Rob.
Yeah.
The Rob?
Just before, it's like we. I think before we, start speaking to the Christians.
Is he coming to take Shahada?
Inshallah, he said to take.
Repeat after me, Rob.
Nope, not even close.
Yeah.
Not even close.
It's your last bars.
He has to learn how to count gods first. After that, he might actually consider taking Shahada.
Just
Hey,
one thing.
hey, Abbas said no mocking. So don't.
I'm not
listen
mocking. I actually mean that.
Listen to what Abbas was saying in regards to how you're going to treat the Christians that are going to come on.
What I would like to do is, because Rob, you've been on before.
They wouldn't count you as a Christian, would they?
Yeah, Abbas and Imran are good friends. We're
grateful for you to come on. And what I would like you to do is, obviously the theme today, or the discussion today, is very much in this supposed dilemma that we Muslims apparently for 14 centuries didn't really have, and Christian scholarship would agree with us as well, but yet Christians today seem to feel that there is this dilemma, and it needs to be brought to people's attention. But
I think Rob acknowledges that it's not an Islamic dilemma, right? You acknowledge the argument doesn't fit. I think I've seen him speak about this before.
Yeah, he has acknowledged that. That if it is what we say it is, that the Torah and the Injil.
Yeah, I mean, let's let Rob come in there. And Rob,
can I just say one thing before we engage with Rob?
Go ahead.
I think just to conclude, before we speak to Rob and Christians after him, is for the Muslims to, when Christians say to you, does the Quran affirm the Torah and the Injil? You say yes. Yes, it does. But don't fall and do not conflate. Say, yes, it does. It affirms the Torah and the Injil, but not the Bible, right? Just make it very clear to them. Because, as John said, people have got confused with the terms. So people now might think that, oh, wait, hold on a second. We don't think it's the Bible. So no, the Quran does not confirm the Torah and the Injil. And this is what we don't want you to start doing, because that is a dangerous statement to make.
Okay. So yes, what I'd like to do, Jazakallah khair, Brother Yamni, what I'd like to do, because obviously there's a lot of us on the screen. John, if you can talk to... No, that's fine. That's fine. Ramzi, you can stay. John, if you can
just give me a second. I'm going to pop in and out of the stream. I'll be listening via YouTube.
No problem.
It's good to hear you guys. Thank you for being here. I'll be in and out, so please.
No problem, Mijaz.
Assalamu alaikum. Take care.
John, because obviously there's a lot of us, if you can speak to Rob first, and then we don't all jump in with our comments, just to give Rob a bit of time and to be able to iron out the discussion. And then, of course, I'll bring on other people in as well. So, Rob, please make your point, and let's see if we can move the conversation on.
Yeah, so Yemeni and I had 2 fruitful long-form discussions on this. I think Yemeni did a good job in further fleshing out John's argument. And however, there's still a massive issue here. As I tried to explain to Yemeni, I call it like the wall that's in front of me that I can't pass through. If in other words, the bridge towards Islam, if I was to, in your terms, revert to Islam, there's this wall that stops me from doing that. And the wall is this. If the terms Torah and Injil are not, say, the Pentateuch and the 4 Gospels, I'm putting aside terms like Old Testament, New Testament, because there's more books than, say, the Pentateuch. And especially, John, when you brought up the Ahmadiyyat and the few other clips, even Sam Shamon's inkling on there must be this... he had it the reverse way. Majority group that had it as a corrupted... Or like some other Torah and Injil sort of
Is acknowledging 2 groups, one believers, one not.
So Yemeni then clarified that to me, and then we basically where the rubber hit the road, where we sort of like finally went into like this particular fulcrum point, and that is, okay, can you give me an example of a original Torah teaching, text, or whatever that is extant to the Quran or the Hadith? And the answer is you can't do that. You can only get that information from the Quran and from the Hadith. So then my next question to Yemeni was, okay, that means everything about Adam to Jesus.
Just to clarify that point, just quickly.
Yeah.
We would only commit to it being a teaching of Jesus theologically if it was mentioned in the Quran or Hadith. Now, with regards to the sayings of Moses, Jesus, all these things in the Bible, we're saying we don't know, we don't affirm or deny any of it. But because it's not mentioned in the Quran and Hadith, we can't affirm or deny that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in my recounting of my discussion, right.
Yeah,
in
so
my recounting of the discussion, I'm keeping in mind, I'm keeping the Bible away. Like I'm not even using the Bible in this context.
But I'm just saying that it's not necessarily just because it's not in the Quran and Hadith. We're saying that if it's not in the Quran and Hadith, we can't commit to saying that it's...
Yes, I understand that. So whatever. So in other words, you are now you are now constrained to only the Quran and the Hadith, and that's it. With respect to what Adam to Jesus did, right?
Pardon?
With respect to what from the people from Adam to Jesus, right?
Yes.
You're constrained to what the Quran says they did and what the Hadith says they did.
Yes.
So to give a gist,
from a strict perspective, yeah.
Yeah. So to give a gist, so essentially we're talking about the history and how can we reconcile these histories? How can we reconcile with what the Quran puts forward as the history with regards to these stories and whatnot, and the external history that is available to us? And I was like, there is no way to do it other than recognizing that the Quran is from Allah, and therefore that would be the true telling of history, and that's where you have to. That's where you got to get to, because the discussion was, what's the source of the Quran? That's where we discussed that. Well, the source of the Quran is from Allah.
Right.
Therefore, that would have to be the history, including the Torah and the Injil. So otherwise we're just going to be going back and forth with historical. Yeah, it's just going to be a historical argument. What's your evidence for this history? What's my evidence for this history? Blah blah blah. But as soon as if you are able to determine that the Quran is from Allah, then all of that discussion goes away, and it becomes the truth. So that's the gist of the conversation.
Right, and that's how our conversation ended with the well. I can see where Yemeni is coming from, that if the Quran ultimately comes from the omniscient God, the creator God himself, then any form of conjectures we have of history falls at the wayside, because at the end of the day, it's the Quran and the Hadith that says this is what history says.
Yeah. And it's either our misunderstanding of history,
but here's where I'm using I'll use the term frustrated, but in a friendly way, because I like Yemeni. And I appreciate the panel over here. My frustration is that, say, in my more private life, in my field of, say, astrophysics, I know how, based on all the models that are circulating and being put to the test and so on, we have a fair certainty on how the universe starts, how the universe has evolved. This includes human evolution, natural history of Earth, and so on and so on. Human migration patterns, human civilizations. If I then have the God, like the creator God himself, now only in a 7th century document called the Quran, and in this case also the Hadith, telling me how the universe functions, what history was like, and then I go and check, even through models, none of the models agree. So that means our models are woefully, corrosive, false. We just don't know how to do history. Only Allah knows how to do history.
Yes.
You see, that's my issue.
Rob, very quickly, just to add, you would agree, if you have revelation, that trumps any other form of information. Would you accept that?
Yes, but
okay.
At the same time, so God's telling me what transpired in history.
So Rob, let me just elaborate on that.
So when I go to history, none agree.
If you believe something to be revelation, you establish it to be revelation, it has to trump any other form of information. And the reason for that, Rob, is you and I know that there's a probabilistic argument that's made for all of these historical events that may or may not have happened. And even when it comes to astrophysics, it's a probabilistic argument that's being made as the most probable, based upon the best inference to the data that you're seeing. Science never will tell you this is 100% and there is no other potential option. And the other thing, Rob, is that science deals in philosophical naturalism. Therefore, everything is viewed with those lenses. There is no explanation outside of the naturalistic world. So it has philosophical underpinnings before it even looks at data. And that data can never be interpreted to be metaphysical. So we're comparing apples to oranges now. The point here is, from our perspective, Rob, we have established, convinced ourselves of the evidence, or the evidence has convinced us that this is revelation. And therefore, revelation trumps any probabilistic argument that is made by anybody else. That's basically our position. But I'd let John continue the conversation because I think you guys had started.
Well, I'll just make a quick clarifying point, and then John, go for it. Even if I were to go via methodological naturalism, that doesn't contradict a theistic or metaphysical or an added metaphysical interpretation on how these things are, like origin of life or evolution itself. I can look at it purely through the lens of naturalism, and then I can talk to my peers and say, but there's a little bit of an uncanny situation here, that there seems to be like a fingerprint of God at work here. So I'm not saying it would be wrong to say that naturalism is atheism. It's
no,
its
I
own
agree.
thing.
But
it's
what
the
it
natural
does
world.
do, Rob, what it does do is it assumes there's no theistic God, or a God who...
It doesn't. It doesn't.
Just one moment. Well, it does assume that that the God is not the same God that revealed the Quran and the Torah and Injil, because obviously we believe Adam was the first human. So that anybody who would believe that as a premise, when they do the same scientific experiments, would never come to the conclusion of evolution in the first place. So there's this kind of hidden premise that there is no theistic God that has revealed the Torah and the Quran and the Injil. What believes that the first man was Adam. So what Abbas was getting at, which I think is important, is the real question is, which is easy, which is the question you should be asking, is the Quran the word of God? And what's the concept of God in Islam? Is I think this is the most solid thing about Islam, which is the concept of God. And also so I just have to turn my camera off a moment. Also the Hadith. Is this also revelation? Did Muhammad, his speech, his actions, is this also inspired by the Creator?
Forgive me, guys. I do have to step out.
Okay.
Mail this, you guys sound like Rahmatullah.
So I think instead of trying to fit the science and the history into Islam, look at Islam on its own first, and inshallah you'll be guided, and Allah will grant you the guidance to be able to see the truth, and then everything fits.
That's essentially
what I told.
Sorry, that's literally where we left off, because I sent Rob on his way after a 5-hour conversation essentially. Right. That he has to figure out whether Rasul could have got this information from anywhere, and if he can't, then he has to accept that.
I think Rob is actually
like I mentioned. By
the way, just 1 minute, Rob. I think you're actually you've done a big research on that, because you show how the Quran doesn't match the Bible at all.
Yeah.
That it doesn't fit.
Well, I've always
you've
I'm
proved
fascinated
that
coming from a biblical critical analysis of like Second Temple discourse that bridges the Old and New Testament, ancient Near Eastern discourses and polemics with specifically with the Old Testament. So I'm coming with that methodology to what we call an intertextual methodology. It's a phenomenon of text, like you can't help it. And so when I come to the Quran, it's interesting. Surah 3, Yemeni clarified to me that Surah 3 is Medinan, Surah 19 is Meccan, but they both have discussions of Mary. Surah 3 is specific about her being fed in the temple, whereas Surah 19 is about her migrating towards the east side, veiling herself, and this encounter with Gabriel. But both have a shared memory that only occurs in one other extant text, and that is the Proto-Evangelion of James. Then Yemeni clarified to me saying, but if it's a Meccan text, there are no Jews and Christians. It's the Quraysh. So my question is, what on earth does Mary, like, why mention the Mary story to Quraysh? Unless they have some inkling of a Mary, the mother of Jesus. And
I said very.
Like, why is it? In other words, why is the Quran fine-tuning and being selective with what to share and not share relative to the Medinan Meccan
just
context
because it's Medinan, just because it is Medinan and Meccan doesn't mean it's necessarily for the people at the time as well. For instance, it mentions that some of the Beni Israel, they said Uzair is the son of God, but most Beni Israel don't. So these every single verse in the Quran is for all time. It's the whole Quran is revealed for the rest of time. And so it would be wrong to think, what's the point in mentioning that now? Allah can mention whatever He wants whenever He wants. It fits. It's recited. It fits in the recitation. And this is what Allah chose. I don't understand what the issue is there. I think you're kind of trying to think a bit too much.
But John,
he's thinking of it like a history book, right? These people were not really aware of Mary, so hence why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking to
you guys got to remember the context, because this is just really just a retelling of what happened literally last night. The context here was he was trying to bring to me how the Prophet ﷺ could have got these stories. And I'm like, well, in Mecca there wasn't Jews and Christians like in terms like to make notes of them. There were very, very small amount.
Only a few of them,
there was very few of them, right? Like Waraqah is a perfect example, right? So and I was like, well, where how is he getting these stories from them? Because these are Gnostic traditions. Waraqah, we believe he was of the true faith, and so that was the idea of the conversation. That's why it was brought up, because if you want to know the source of the Quran, well, put yourself in 7th century Mecca when it was being revealed, how the Quraysh reacted to it, and then later in Medina, how the Jews and the Christians reacted to it. Put yourself in that climate. And then when you see how all the different accusations that the Quraysh were throwing at Rasulullah, there were 6 different accusations about how he came in possession of the Quran. And
did they not have a picture of Mary in the Kaaba, if I'm not mistaken?
No, that's actually inauthentic. The authentic one is of Ibrahim. Yeah, if Ibrahim and Ismail, that's authentic.
I think one thing, Rob, you've mentioned this before, and you've mentioned about stories in the Quran that are in apocrypha works or works that were regarded to be, fraudulent or whatever. But the point still stands that if it is established that the Quran is revelation from God Almighty, then the Christians were wrong to make those stories apocrypha, because those stories were true. And there's a very classic example of this that Brother Muhammad Hijab raised on one of his discussions or lessons that he was doing on Sapiens, of the Kathisma Church. I don't know if you heard of that.
Yeah, the Kathisma, the palm tree.
Right. So
Shoemaker makes a big deal on that.
Shoemaker makes the argument that the Quran mentions certain things about Mary that she retreats.
But that's only in Surah 19, by the way.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But the Quran mentions that she leaves her people to the outskirts, and it mentions a tree that she's comforted by with the fruits, and a stream that she's comforted by drinking. And this story does appear, by the way, but it's a very obscure, unknown story to most Christians, in fact. And he claims, this is his claim, it is so unlikely that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, could have got hold of this story. The only explanation he comes up with is a Quran that had to be constantly being updated. So when Jerusalem was finally conquered and the Muslims somehow got hold of this very obscure story, that they must have copied it in the Quran. But here's the problem. When you got people like Angelica Newith, one of the foremost experts on Quranic manuscripts, and the only reason I raise her is because she's raised her, her credentials is because she's A, highly respected, and B, she's not Muslim. She says it's a fixed text. We don't have this transition of throughout history Muslims disagreeing with Quran and the different sort of mosques in different parts of the world, all reciting different Qurans, which is what, by the way, what we do see in Christianity, because the Gospels were not agreed upon unanimously, and they still aren't today, right? But the point here is, his argument is, and that this story is so obscure, and it's not in mainstream Christianity, there's no way that the Prophet Muhammad could. So the point, I think, actually, that's being made here, and quite naively, he's actually made our argument, which is that it was impossible for them to have known it. The fact that we can establish that the Quran is an early fixed text, i.e. there's no transition between the first 50 years or 100 years of different types of Qurans all going out and different stories coming in and coming out, it actually proves that the Christians have left out stories or left out historical events on the basis that they didn't agree with them, or they didn't realize that they were true. And I think that's an evidence for Islam and an evidence for the Quran. But ultimately, Rob, I would say to you that your assessment of the Quran should be, why is this revelation? What makes this revelation? Why is it a miraculous text, as it's argued? What is the inimitability challenge of the Quran? How can it be that for 14 centuries you have 95% of the Muslim Ummah today reading Hafs al-Asim, and the only explanation for that has to be early fixed text and preservation? It cannot be multiple readings and multiple texts, because you will never get a unified text. Muslims have argued over history about many creedal issues and many other issues. They've never argued about the Quran. And had there been these different Qurans hovering around, I can guarantee you that the different Jamaat, the different congregations, would have never accepted the other person's other versions of the Quran if they were if they were in existence. So this all proves that, I think, the authenticity of the Quran, the preservation of the Quran, the purity of the Quran, and the evidence of the Quran that it actually mentions things that even have been lost within Christianity. But I've said quite a lot, Rob. You come in, and then Ijaz maybe can and they can come in there as well.
Yeah. So my thoughts. Well, you mentioned Angelica. She's now published her German commentaries with updated references. The first one came out in 2022. The second one, 2024. So last year. Where she actually puts the surahs chronologically. So, like, I have here the first couple, Surah 93, the Morning Light, Surah 94, the Expanding, and Surah 97, the Decree, Night of the Decree. She places them as the earliest surahs. And then, being friends with Nicholas Sinai and a few others of this critical strand, there's one particular scholar by the name of Basil Laurie, and this is a work that's titled The Jewish and Christian Background of the Earliest Islamic Liturgical Calendar. It's a 2020 work, where based on her work, the Night of Decree Surah is a palimpsest of a Christian Christmas hymn. Now, and this is not Luxembourg fantasy land. This is
that doesn't. Sorry, can you repeat the name of the people? Because the use of the word palimpsest here doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
So the Jewish and Christian background of the earliest Islamic liturgical calendar.
The Jewish and Christian background.
That's the name of his essay, yes, by Basil Laurie. And
how do you spell the surname?
Lourie, French.
Is it French? Yeah, okay. Okay.
And so he's like, I'll quote verbatim what he says. Modern scholars have defined it as a nativity tradition. And another one could be a fragment of a Christian hymn written before Muhammad and certainly depends directly on pre-Islamic Christian hymnography. Like, these are just snippets from his larger essay.
Yeah,
no, wait, Ijaz, let me just clarify where I was wanting to go with it. I'm just sort of laying out examples where I'm familiar with the scholarship where they themselves in the critical strand are now giving a chronological view of the Quran.
Yeah,
right?
but Rob, to
so
be
there
fair,
is this evolution.
Rob,
one second.
No, I understand, but I'm just going to stop you because you've made a point that I didn't actually make. The point specifically that I made was that Angelica Newith's argument is that it is an early fixed text. Now, you can bring other scholars in if you want to. That's fine. We can debate
when you say it's an early fixed text, that's not obviously, you don't confuse the audience with the 23 years that the Quran is emerging, right? Especially with his migration patterns between Mecca, Medina, and so on.
Rob, I don't understand.
Brothers, I'm going to have to get going.
No problem, John.
So the Quran is being revealed chronologically, right? And so Angelica's reconstruction is that she's starting with Surah 93 as the first, moving forward. So then what I'm doing is, that's her hypothesis, yes. So what I'm doing is I'm going, okay, let's go along with her model. Let's see. We
don't need to. Rob, here's the thing.
This is me. I'm taking what the arguments that you've laid out. I'm then seeing her argumentation. So I'm going along with her model.
Yeah, but remember what I said? Yeah, but Rob, remember
wait. I'm then seeing the very careful fine-tuning and nuance of those apocryphal legends that then emerge in a very convenient way. And so my pushback, Abbas, is that big picture context, Adam being 60 cubits, Adam originally in heaven, that contradicts evolution, that contradicts modern science, that contradicts human anthropology in a nutshell.
Rob, to be fair,
Abraham in the fire. That contradicts the migration patterns of Abraham.
You're shotgunning, and you're not sticking to what I said, and I think that's a bit unfair. You're starting moving to evolution. You're moving to 60 cubits. My comment was very, very simple, and your argument.
No. This is going back to what I have to believe. If God Himself is saying this is what happened to Adam. This is his height, and so on. I have to believe that.
I understand,
right?
but we're talking about Angelica Newith claiming that the Quran is an early fixed text, and you're going into 60 cubits of Adam, which is a different argument. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Let's be fair. My statement is correct. My statement is factually correct that Angelica Newith does not consider the Quran to be something that was being changed, manipulated, and took centuries to actually finalize in terms of
I'm not denying that either.
I understand.
I'm going along with your argumentation on that.
Rob, then the reason why I said that was in reference to Shoemaker's claim.
Yes, I know.
Which was that the Quran did change over time, and it took decades and decades.
Within the surah itself, you have an evolution and an
the point. So I think, Rob, to be fair, my point stands. Now, if you want to talk about 60 qubits and why that perhaps disagrees, but I'd like to get Ijaz to come in there for a bit, inshallah ta'ala, because we are coming to.
I don't understand the point he's trying to make. And just to confirm, I'm going to put the name of the paper in the chat. Is this the name of the paper that you're referring to? Let me read it again. The Jewish and Christian background of the earliest Islamic liturgical calendar. Is that the book you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay, so you said that this was evidence of something because of a palimpsest.
Yeah, I'm using the term palimpsest. So I'm saying, because what he's saying is no different to, the phenomenon of what a palimpsest is. That you have at the basal layer, so to speak, an original Christian hymn of some type that then is reworked as being Muhammad's night of the decree rather than the Christmas night.
Yeah, that's not a palimpsest.
That is a palimpsest.
Not a palimpsest. Palimpsests
Define to me what a palimpsest is.
Okay, a palimpsest is a manuscript feature where you have a script to your inferior and a script to your superior.
Yeah, so you have a text underneath, a text is written on top, right?
Yeah, but
if you're talking about, say Egyptian hieroglyphs, so the famous phenomena of like helicopters in Egypt, well, no, it's a palimpsest that the text before has been suddenly re-emerged and it gives the illusion of these other shapes.
It has nothing to do
that's
with
an actual
image.
palimpsestic context. I'm using that
I think you're misusing
as an
the word,
analogy to say that you have on top of this Christian hymn a
that's
reworking for Muhammad.
That's a misuse of the word.
Then some other word, a more accurate term than palimpsest.
Like do us a favor, right? Because you're basing your argument on this person's paper. How does this person phrase that statement? Does he say something like that, or is this you yourself trying to?
Well, how else do you understand him when he says it's defined as a nativity tradition? Could be a fragment of a Christian hymn written before Muhammad. Certainly depends directly on pre-Islamic Christian hymnography.
Mm-hmm. Has nothing to do with the palimpsest. It's like critical, so then, like a source critical comment.
Yeah, and also Rob, and also he uses the word could be, and the reason why he uses the word could be, it's very, very poignant point that you've made. Actually, he uses that word because he does not believe the Quran to be revelation. Therefore, he has to come up with a suggestion, an idea, a hypothesis of where the information could have come from, and his view, because it's not divine, his view, because it's not from God, it has to have a naturalistic explanation. And so he comes up with a hypothesis of what that natural explanation might be. That's not evidence, Rob.
Yeah, but then you would agree 97 is corresponding to the festivals of the Islamic calendar that just so happens to match things like Day of Atonement, Passover, Pentecost, Easter.
Rob, my point
right?
stands.
The whole context of Ramadan.
Rob, what I've just said to you, my point stands. The point here is, if you're going to quote somebody, this person needs to have evidence to back up what their argument. If they're saying could be,
yeah. So read the extent. So Ijaz, for example, go read the extent of his paper and come back. Maybe make a critical review of it.
You're the one who quoted him saying could be. Okay, could be is might be, could be possibly. It doesn't mean that here is the evidence, and this is why this is the most. This is the strongest argument.
Abbas, you were the one that brought up Angelica, and then I went through a breadcrumb trail saying that these are the guys connected to her.
No, there's a reason why I brought Angelica. See, Rob, here's the difference. The reason why I brought Angelica Newith is because she goes to the manuscripts. She is one of the foremost experts on Quranic manuscripts.
Yeah.
She bases.
Do you agree with her that Surah 93 is the first surah?
Hold on a second, Rob. Hold on a second. She bases her conclusions based upon, and this is what she says. She says, far from contradicting the Muslim narrative, the recent finds, in other words, the manuscript, the sheer weight of the manuscript evidence that has been found, the Sana manuscripts, hundreds of them, thousands of them, far from contradicting the Muslim view of preservation, it only reaffirms it. She says it confirms it, basically, that the Quran is indeed an early fixed text, it's preserved. Now, the point is, she does not base that on could be or might be. She's saying that the manuscript evidence, and by the way, she also talks about, and this was a famous discussion that Yasser Qadi overheard when he was at university studying at Yale or whatever, where one of the scholars was arguing that the Quranic language seems to indicate multiple authors. She went into a long explanation with him, looking at the linguistics of the Quran, the grammar of the Quran, the structure of the Quran, that actually, no, it's one author. So she's not saying could be. She's not saying might be. She's not saying possibly.
What you're saying,
She's
Yes.
hold on, Rob, let me just finish. She's saying the overwhelming evidence, the tangible, witnessable, witnessed, viewable, testable evidence indicates that the Quran is indeed preserved, as the Muslims are claiming, and that the more manuscripts we're finding only reinforces that view, doesn't challenge that view. Now, what you've brought, with all due respect, Rob, is somebody who's saying it could be this, basically. I don't have to accept that.
No. I'm not. You brought up Angelica. I'm bringing up the wheelhouse of discussions within her circle, people that she knows, and vice versa. I find the arguments interesting, and this all comes back down to the original discussion Yemeni and I had. Now, with respect to the way you concluded that if you have a fixed text, it's one author, it's like a fixed language sort of thing. All the more then the Quran, and in this case Allah himself, because it's not from Muhammad, this is Allah through Muhammad, is on the hot seat when it comes to history. So when I then go to history from Adam to Jesus, I then notice if I was to do a critical edition, like Jaz brought up the BH5 that's about to be released soon.
My apologies.
So like a critical edition of the
Adam, dude? Like, you're speaking nonsense, dude. What history do you have of Adam? What are you talking about, Rob?
So Fawad, here we go. Where were humans originally, geographically?
Dude, don't get into evolution.
Do you know what anthropologists say with respect to where humans originate?
You talked about history, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So here's the litmus test. Here it is in action.
Rob,
believe Adam is in heaven, sent to earth. Where on earth?
Nonsense, dude. Wait. I have a simple question. You spoke of history,
why
right?
why the squirming away from the question? Why can't we actually go there? I mean, yes, okay, you have the Quran as a data point. You're saying it's coming from Allah.
All right, guys.
So
let me moderate. Let me 1 second, Fawad. Okay, Rob.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you finish your point. Okay, but I'd please appreciate if we don't overdo. If I'm doing it, please correct me as well. I'm not saying that.
I'll respect Abbas. I'll respect your moderation. But
you finish your point, Rob, and let Fawad make his point, and then Ijaz, I think you wanted to say something as well.
So a 60 cubit bipedal primate. It's impossible for a 60 cubit bipedal primate to exist with respect to the Earth's size, its gravity. I mean, you're talking just simple Newtonian mechanics here.
Perfect.
How is that possible?
That's your contention, right? How many times have you brought up this nonsense argument? How many times have we responded to this, Rob? You brought the same nonsense even on my channel, and we responded to you that nowhere in the Islamic literature does it say necessarily that Adam alayhi salam was 60 cubit on earth. How many times do we have to repeat that to you, dude?
Okay, clarification.
Name
so do you believe as a Muslim, as a Muslim, do you believe that Adam was originally 60 cubits and then he gets downgraded in height when he lands on Earth?
God cannot do this? You think God cannot do this?
Okay, then where on Earth is he placed?
Wait, hang on a second. Red herring, total red herring. Stop shotgunning, dude.
Rob, even if Rob, even if we had the answer to that, you'd say, "What did he eat for breakfast?"
Yeah.
No.
He does this every single time, Ikhwan.
No.
I think
I'm going somewhere with the 60 cubit thing, because the only other 60 cubit mention in extant literature, so the Talmud takes Nebuchadnezzar's 60 cubit statue in Daniel 3 and applies it to Adam.
Rob,
now what do you do with that?
Rob, you're missing the whole point here.
Jazakallah khair for having me on. I can't stand this scatterbrain.
Anyway, okay,
So here's the thing: the litmus test is not to do with history. You're missing the point. The litmus test is it revelation? Because if it's revelation, regardless of what the history you think is true, is not true. The history as told in the Quran is true. That's the litmus test. It's not the history.
Then, as I told you, Yemeni, yesterday, that I would have to throw out everything I know, whether it's the sciences, whether it's
that's the point of faith,
the humanities, and my Bible. Because, and in fact, Abbas, Abbas, this is to clarify to Abbas and Ajaz, when I used this fork in the road thing, which actually was quite helpful for Yemeni and I to progress our discussion. So this is the realization I was having with Yemeni's explanation. The fork in the road is this. This is me and my Bible. which, with respect to the Islamic dilemma debates and discussions, so in other words, there's no fork. It's just that, and then the claim is like, in these debates where if the Quran says, "Look to the Torah and the Gospel," you're sticking to just my Bible. Now, I'm understanding now the nuance of the argument being raised by John and Yemeni in the sense that no, there's this other genuine Torah, Injil, Gospel thing that is not the Bible. So then now we're at a fork in a road now, where here's me with my Genesis to Revelation, and here's Yemeni with respect to the Quran and its assertion of its original Torah that was given to Moses and Injil to Jesus. Now, at least I have my Bible in hand per se, but technically you don't with the Torah and the Injil, except for you're relying on the Quran and the Hadiths to rework that somehow, or like it's embedded in there, like pieces of it. Oh, hey, Samad. So,
Rob, just
but
like
if I look at what the Quran and the Hadith then say, what the Torah says, and if it gets those accounts wrong, why can't I answer? Why can't I ask that question?
The question you're asking doesn't make sense, Rob, because the position we're arguing is that they possess something unique in Medina. That's it. Like the question that you should be asking is, how do I know what the Jews in Medina possessed? I have to ask myself, why did they accept his judgment about people caught in fornication? Why do they accept his judgment of Banu Qurayza, the punishment that they received for treachery? Why are they accepting this man as an authority over them willingly, even to the point that they are losing their lives? They still obey him. Why do they do that? From your perspective, can you account for that with these people?
Well, so Yemeni clarified to me the psychological context of how there's this issue
Yemeni,
of trust.
What I just said, I love Yemeni, right? But forget him for a moment. Hear what I just said.
No. Yeah, Jaz, I'm working with what you're saying. So to give a very interesting and very clear example was this trust issue, where they started to trust him, acknowledge him, and so on and so on. But then it comes, so Surah 25 suddenly says, they start throwing back accusations. Those who disbelieve say, oh, he was being taught morning and evening, or however else the passage gets at. So in other words, there are these throwback responses, and so then it seems to be a contradiction, because how can they with one out of the same mouth say that they trust and like Muhammad,
good,
but then at the same time reject him?
This is perfect. Do me a favor, open up the Quran chapter 2 verse 75.
All right.
Because this is what we as Muslims are saying. You're making our argument for us. 275. Okay, so 275 says, do you believers still expect them, meaning the Jews of Medina, to be true to you, though a group of them would hear the word of Allah, then knowingly corrupt it after understanding it? So for us as Muslims, we accept that the Quran is saying that these people are munafiqeen hypocrites. So of course they have duplicitous behavior. Yes, they have contradictory behavior. The Quran is not hiding from that. The Quran is directly stating so. So I need you, like the question was, how do you account for their historical obedience to this man, not just in their social circumstances, but in their legal rulings for adultery and fornication, and for being executed for betrayal, treachery? Why do they still obey him at those 2 points?
Well, but that doesn't really do anything for me, because I'm then
answer the question.
left with I'm trying to answer the question like this, that these people then they end up believing in Muhammad, but so for example, the Christians that end up believing in Muhammad, what type of Christianity did they have anyway? What type of worship did they have? What was their...
That's
Give them the
irrelevant.
Christianity that you believe
It's
in.
relevant to what I asked you. Sorry, Brother Samad. I asked you
Okay,
a
then
simple
repeat your question then.
My question was, why did the Jews in Medina accept the authority of the Prophet, not just socially or culturally, but when it came to the edicts of their religion? Why did they accept him as that of final authority?
If that happened, I can't see how they can, based on the Pentateuch that I have.
So your model.
What is that Torah, or what is their theology or their charisma?
Okay, perfect. So
that
what you're
led to
saying is
their...
that perfect. You're saying that your model cannot account for the facts as they exist. That's what you're saying to me.
That's always what I've said.
Right. So if your model is faulty, why is that my problem? That's a you problem.
No, that's not my problem.
Okay.
Because I already believe that the Pentateuch was the Torah.
Okay.
What you guys and John is trying to say is no. That in that fork in the road, there's this Torah and Injil.
I need you to answer
remember
the question.
the Sam Shimon clip he played
please,
as well.
Rob, I'm asking a simple question. Why did the Jews in Medina accept the Prophet's authority in religious matters?
I can't answer that based on the text that I have, where I know theologically it would make no sense to accept Muhammad and his authority.
Okay. So it's a fact that they did accept him as an authority, to the point of even being punished for treachery. So my model accounts for that. John's model accounts for it. The Quran's model accounts for it. So we have the solution and you don't have the solution. The question is asked and answered.
No. This then leads to then what Torah? So if they're already having, like Yemeni, you mentioned they were expecting a prophet.
Hold on.
And so they're already being encouraged that there's going to be a prophet. So they should, if Allah is revealing the Torah, Muhammad is written in the Torah, Muhammad's in the Injil, give me an example where we can actually then clarify and say, yes, that continues on straight into this thing called the Quran and Islam.
So in the Hadith, if John was still here, he would tell you about the questions that they asked him to qualify as a prophet. There were 3 questions that they asked him. The other thing that they noted was the seal of prophecy on his shoulder. So we do know what evidence is that they were looking for. You seem to think that the Pentateuch as it exists today existed the same way in Medina. And there's no evidence for that. We don't know what they consider to be the Torah.
I'm not saying that.
Sorry?
I'm not saying that either. In fact, in my discussion
what Torah
with
do you think they had then?
So there was a Star Wars analogy raised.
Sorry?
So in my discussion with Yemeni, there was a Star Wars analogy raised by another Muslim who said that Tatooine, so Arabia is kind of like Tatooine in the outer rim with respect to everything else.
Yeah, forget about
like
this.
The Roman Empire.
That was one.
But that's a fantastic analogy.
It's a rubbish analogy. It's a rubbish analogy. Right? There's so many wrongs with it. And as Star Wars fans,
no, but you saw the implications where I was saying, well, then that means the Bible that I have is indeed part of the Roman Empire. So, let's just say that the Jews in Medina do not have the Pentateuch in hand. So what did they have that clarify them that Muhammad is true?
We're coming to the end of the stream, so I want to get Brother Samad just quickly, and then
Rob, nice to hear you speaking again. But as I told you before, I don't think that your approach is quite correct due to 2 things. Yeah. First of all, you discuss history, but you don't come across as somebody who knows the history. With all due respect, you don't know the history of the region. So I hear to your exchange with Brother Yemeni last time. You made enormous. I wrote so much on Brother Yemeni's video. Actually, so many comments that it might, classify as a dissertation.
Spam. Right.
Because the amount of historical inaccuracies you commit are not forgivable. Like, first of all, you conflate Ur and you say that it's 2 different villages, the Ur that Ibrahim was born at according to the Torah, and then you dismiss it by saying, it's just, like some linguistic misunderstanding, because Ur means in Akkadian this, which is fire. You
No, no, no.
Listen, I'm not going to discuss it.
You misunderstood what I was getting at.
With all due respect, the brothers are tired. I'm tired myself. I'm not going to discuss it. I'm just trying to highlight where you go wrong. Your approach is inaccurate because you are not well read about the subject. With all due respect, no well-read anybody. I'll bring you a 7-year-old from my country, Iraq. Yeah, and they would understand. They would tell you right away where Sumer is and where Oman is. You conflate.
Yes,
Sumer with Oman.
that was.
Listen. I'm not discussing. I'm not discussing here. I'm just highlighting your
That
inaccuracy.
doesn't negate the point I was making, that Ur is south, not the northern Ur that gave rise to the Abraham fire traditions.
Rob, with all due respect, my point is that you are not well read. You are not well versed about the history. You can't differentiate between Sumer and Ur. Well, okay, I'll ask you this: what is the difference between Sumer and Ur? What's the difference?
Sumer and Shinar are literally north of the Persian
what's
Gulf.
the difference? That's not my question. What is the historical difference between Sumer and Ur?
Sumer, the term Sumer comes later. Ur is earlier.
No,
if you're talking about etymology.
No.
That's based on what the cuneiform says.
Where are you getting this from?
The cuneiform writings that we've discovered, and also the ziggurat structures that have the cylinder seals that are shoved into the ziggurat structures.
Guys, just to be the moderator here, I think the conversation has gone.
Yeah, and this is deviating off the original, context of the.
Can you finish your point,
You're just trying to say that I don't know my stuff, even though I'm raising questions.
Let him just finish his point, and Abbas will take control from there.
Have you heard of Samuel Kramer?
Yeah.
Who is he?
He's the guy that did the investigations with respect to Ur and Sumer.
Did the investigation? He's one of few people in the entire human history, modern history, who could decipher, understand cuneiform language, cuneiform text.
Yeah.
He's not some guy. Okay. Have you heard about? Have you heard about?
Have you heard of Harry Hofner?
No, I haven't. But I read.
Okay.
I read for
what about Jimmy Hofmeyer?
Hofmeyer I read. Let me tell you about the people
excellent.
I read. Okay. So there's Samuel Kramer.
Now we Ajaz.
Rob,
moderate. He's deviating the whole discussion into like scholar comparison.
Rob, I'm just muting you, Rob, for a second.
Just one second.
She's a doctor.
Rob, I'm going to try to wind up the discussion, but Rob, you have to allow. If things get uncomfortable because you're being put a little bit on the spot, then that's fine. But you have to bear it patiently, Rob. Let him speak. Let him finish his point. I am going to give you time to respond, Rob, but you have to respond directly to what Brother Samad is actually saying, please, if you could. Brother Samad, finish your point, inshallah.
I'll finish my point. That I'm not here to debate you, Rob. I told you I would happily join many day discussion with you. I might learn so much from you as well. But the approach you're using is that you're mixing some, correct historical accounts and conflating them with inaccurate accounts. And then you're coming to conclusions based on these inaccuracies, which is really dangerous. It's really concerning. It's not a scientific approach to start with. This is my first point. The second point was that history is not the decisive factor. And I'll tell you one. I'll give you one analogy. Yeah. How long did Christians and Jews believe that there was a Tower of Babel? Yeah. Until today, I speak to Christians who genuinely believe it existed one point in time. There is no historical record whatsoever. You could consult the more than 18,000 tablet library of Nebuchadnezzar II, who is the founder of the Chaldean dynasty. Well, not the founder. His father was the founder, actually, Nabopolassar. But that's not my point. My point is, this is from 600, from the time of the monarch, from the time of the king, more than 18,000 clay tablets that extensively tell you about the everyday small details about how they lived, how much they paid for the servants, even the kind of perfume they would pay for the maids of the queen. Yeah, no mention of the Tower of Babel whatsoever. Let's go back in time to the first dynasty or the first Babylonian kingdom. Hammurabi is the most common, the most famous one of them. No mention of a tower whatsoever. Yet, Christians still take it wholeheartedly that there was a Tower of Babel. I'm not going to contest them on that. They could believe what they believed. Maybe in the future there might be a Tower of Babel. Who knows? But this is not for me as a Muslim. This is not the approach that we use. We are told and commanded to be truthful, even against ourselves. Even when we say something, if I tell a lie now, I would have to come out and say, listen, I told a lie. I just lied. Yeah? This is the approach that we use. Your problem is that you're taking any argument, any kind of discussion, and try to look for loopholes. And this is where you get all your energy and focus on. So this is my sincere advice. If you like to approach history, I'd be your friend on that. I'd learn from you. But my humble advice is that you need to get more information about the subject. And I don't mean it in a condescending way, in all honesty. I don't know about the history of your country. I don't know about your culture. I would learn from other people. But when you are telling inaccuracies and spreading it as like quite in a positive way, you even got me, myself, yeah. Even I doubted myself, and I had to go back to the literature that I read before and say, listen, okay, this guy seems to be positive about what he's saying. I'm telling you, I have it right here on my computer. I have Samuel Kramer's book that I opened again yesterday because I listened to many hours of your exchange with brother Yemeni. But your approach is incorrect, my brother. This is my sincere advice. Take it or leave it, and I'll end with that.
Well, that's
Sorry if I come across as aggressive, everybody, and thank you so
Rob,
much.
I'm going to give you the last word before you go, Rob. And Fred, if you were listening, Brother Sarma did actually say that there could well be a Tower of Babylon that may be found in the future. He did not say that as a certainty it doesn't exist. So I think your comment is actually incorrect because you're not listening to what actually was said here. Anyway, Rob, you're going to have the last word.
I'll bridge it back to the original topic because all the nuances of the Ur Chaldean stuff. The Quran has Abraham. So as a Christian, I believe in Abraham. As a Muslim, you believe in Abraham. Now this is where the fork in the road happens. You have this belief that he was smashing all the idols, puts the axe in the biggest idol's hand, mocks them. Even his name is Abraham before he's called, like in the Bible, he's Abram, then Abraham. All these differences, right? And then he's saved from the fire. It's interesting that not me, just everyone in the scholarly field understands that there's a phonetic fallacy when it came to Jerome's mistranslation of or in his Latin Vulgate when he had igni calorium. He thought or was the Hebrew word or, which means light fire. Not until the discovery of the cuneiform did we understand that or in Genesis, so in that fork in the road, my Pentateuch is not the Torah that was with the Jews in the context of Muhammad, right? So my Genesis text has or as a loan word, an Akkadian loan word that means either country or city. And even the Septuagint gets it correct when it translates or as the country of Mesopotamia. So if someone like Jerome can make a phonetic fallacy assuming it's fire, and then a whole legend starts to emerge out of this, so starting with the Book of Jubilees, because Jubilees doesn't have fire, it just has the idols being smashed. Then the Targums, and then the Talmud and Jerome. So you have patristic traditions that hold to a fire situation. Then it culminates in the Quran, specifically with that phrase, be cool, be tranquility. So then I can't help, and even the scholars I've read can't help but go, oh, that means Allah doesn't know the difference between Akkadian and Hebrew/Aramaic. Because if he, and by the way, this is my last comment then in this context, I would find a hair would be raised at the back of my head. I would agree it would be supernatural if in 7th century Arabia, Allah corrected the myth. If he said, no, this myth about Abraham being saved from the fire is not true, if he corrected it, because we don't discover until the 1800s that it's a cuneiform term, right? That would be a genuine miracle, because no one knew anything about Ugaritic, Akkadian, and so on for like 1,000 years prior to Muhammad. No one knew about it. So that would be a genuine miracle in that sense, because then you could argue, how could Muhammad know? Because no one would know.
But Rob,
So,
just so
but the
I
Quran
understand
repeats
you.
the myth. That's the
Yeah,
point.
Rob, so just so I understand, your point is the Quran is false because it says Abraham goes into fire. Is that the
Yes.
summary of the point?
One
Okay.
of many examples I can raise, yes.
Okay. So what if it's not a legend?
If it's not a legend, in other words, if Urfa, in Turkey where they have the cave of Abraham and a mosque there,
Forget the
if that
like.
actually is the location of Ur and it actually did
I'm
happen,
not.
then the Quran is correct. And the
Rob,
Bible's wrong, because the Bible
Rob,
doesn't mention cave and
hear my
fire and so
words.
on.
Hear my words, right? I'm trying to make it very simple for you. All you seem to be saying to us is that if there is fire and there's a story about Abraham with it, this story cannot be true because earlier sources don't mention it. What earlier sources are you referring to for the life of Abraham?
Not just earlier sources, just
No,
what
just
we
on the
understand of
sources.
Sumer and Ur.
Well, your understanding would be based on the sources. So what is the basis, what is the literary source for your claims about Abraham? It would be the Old Testament. Am I correct?
Yes, it would come down
And it's
to
going to be Genesis 16, 17, 18, and 19, 4 chapters.
No, we're going Genesis 11.
Okay, so 8 chapters. So 8 chapters that don't tell you Abraham was on
Genesis
a
11,
fire.
because you're talking about Terah and Abraham's lineage and what was happening over
We can keep
there.
expanding it. Let's say 20 chapters. That there
Yeah.
they're not 20 chapters, but the point being, even if there were 20 chapters about the life of Abraham in the Old Testament, do you understand that that's not a historical basis for the historical Abraham? It's an interpretation on a possible Abraham.
You've missed. No, that it's not even talking about the history of Abraham. I'm talking about specifically the fire claim.
Which is a claim about Abraham.
When's the first time does the fire claim emerge in writing?
We don't know.
Not the 1st century CE, not even the 1st century BC. We're talking 3rd, 4th century CE. Does the fire claim emerge?
There's a difference between a text that is archetypal and a text that's autographic. That a text emerges in the 3rd or 4th century, you will have to demonstrate that it's stematologically does not go back to the 1st or 2nd century. And I don't believe you have the evidence to do so, because I asked you what was the basis for your argument, and you said it was the Old Testament. And I gave you 20 chapters of Genesis. Okay, so the point behooves you.
Why does Jerome make a comment as to the reason why he chose igni, the Latin word igni? He makes a comment saying the Jews within his vicinity transfer this legend that Abraham was saved from the fire. The only example in writing that we have Ur as fire would be the Aramaic and the Peshitta and the Targums that talk about this fire-like language.
I think Brother Abu Zakaria,
I'm just basing it on that. He doesn't realize that Ugaritic predates even the Masoretic tradition by thousands of years.
I think Brother Abu Zakaria has made a video on this subject on his channel, One Prophet, One Message. And actually he establishes historically that they used to punish people by fire. So he actually makes this. So I'm going to put the link.
I've seen that video.
Yeah.
Do you know what he doesn't realize? There are scholars who have worked on oven torture. And so there were some scholars that even went as far as to say, if you're going with a 6th or 5th century BC composition for Daniel's book, they're still finding it hard-pressed that even Nebuchadnezzar would have practiced fire-like torture in an oven sense. In other words, oven torture stuff doesn't happen until after, say, 5th, 6th century BC, let alone going back 20 centuries prior to that. It's the Egyptians that practiced oven tortures. Not the Babylonians.
Rob, there are 2 things. I'm just going to end with this point because I know we have to close the stream. There are 2 things that we can use to determine events in the past. artifacts or documentary sources. For you, your documentary source is the Old Testament. The Old Testament is not a text contemporaneous to Moses, David, even Daniel. The form of the text that we have is probably within 200 years of Christ Jesus. So you're not arguing for something in which that there is artifacts to prove your point. And your point about Justin is that he corrupted the Bible and Christians accepted it. Jerome corrupted the Bible, had nothing to do with us. You're making the point for us. So I don't think your argument is as intelligent as you want it to be.
Jaz, I can go along with the Maccabean dating of Daniel and so on, with the redactional criticism context. Jerome is an example of a human
corruption.
being making a really silly error due to ignorance of an older loan term.
Error or corruption?
I would say both. A corruption
so
and an error.
The Bible
because
was
then that
corrupted
leads, because notice that this supports my view. It leads down a rabbit hole, a tumbling like domino effect, that if he makes a corruption and an error by mistranslating ore as fire, legends emerge. Allah should have known better. Allah should have said, no, there was no fire. That's a mistranslation. It's a phonetic fallacy.
So here's the problem you run into now. So for 800 years, the Latin Vulgate was the scripture for Christians. It contained a mistake and an error, which you admitted to, and God had nothing to say about it, from your perspective.
Yeah, but it's a translation, not the Masoretic tradition, not the Dead Sea Scrolls,
change to scripture?
Not even the Septuagint.
But it's the scripture that Christians believed in.
When Stephen Acts 7...
Rob, you have to let people finish.
Okay, my last 2-second point to
let him finish his point. Rob, let him finish his point. Rob,
okay, then I'll finish my point. Go for it.
My point was simply that you believe God allowed an error, corruption, and change to the text, and for 800 years, Christians believed in this verbatim, and no one had anything to say about it. Why is that a problem for me and not a problem for you?
It's not a problem for me because first century Christians like Stephen in Acts 7, who recounts the Abraham story using the Septuagint, which is a translation that got it correct. So if Stephen said Abraham saved from the fire in Acts 7, I would have to say, Stephen, you're wrong. But he gets it correct by understanding the term as country of Chaldea. Great, because that's what the word actually meant in Akkadian. Then I'm not even it doesn't concern me about Latin translations and so on that come like centuries after Stephen's declaration in Acts 7. So those later translations, it's a translation that gets it wrong, and then the Quran repeats the same wrong statement about Abraham being saved from the fire. That's your issue, not mine. At least my Bible doesn't have that, whether it's in the New or Old Testament.
Does the Quran say the fire of Chaldea?
It doesn't mention the Chaldeans. It just says fire.
Okay, so
but specifically the phrase "be cool, be a tranquility," which is verbatim in the Talmud.
So this is beautiful, right? In the Quran, it says nothing about being fire, but rather it tells us a story about Abraham being in the fire, and you equate the two. You equate the two to then come and tell me that there's no connection between them. Thank you.
Wait, what?
That background that you have behind you, change it to something else, because I don't think you understand. You've refuted yourself. Yeah, you refuted yourself. But anyway, get the last point in, because we've been live for 4 hours. Make your concluding point. I'm not going to respond. Just make your final point, Rob, and we'll close the stream there.
I think the discussion Yemeni and I had was quite fruitful in my opinion, but it. With all due respect to Yemeni, the wall is still there. I consider him a friend, but the wall is still there in the sense that based on everything we discussed, the Bible still stands true, and everything that I do with respect to the Quran, if I was to do like a critical edition, like a BH edition of what the Quran thinks happened to Adam to Jesus, it only matches with all the legends that emerge, and hence Surah 25, Surah 16, this notion that these are old tales, tales of the ancients. I side with those criticisms because the only examples that I do see from Adam to Jesus with respect to the Quran are in those extant literatures. And that's it. It doesn't come down to the established Tanakh and New Testament documentation. Even the patristic writing, like you mentioned in the Qumran community, the War Scroll. Well, the War Scroll is quoting from Deuteronomy, it's quoting from Numbers, it's even quoting from Ezekiel, because the War Scroll has Gog, Magog mentioned in there. And the only other occurrence of Gog, Magog is from the book of Ezekiel. Now, why would the War Scroll be referring to my scriptures, not some extant Torah thing that is unique with respect to Medina and Mecca and so on?
Okay, Rob, thank you very much for your input, and we will endeavor to perhaps speak in the future. I think, Rob, the point really is that you're...
I don't know if I was breaking up because everyone's frozen. Was I breaking up just then? No?
I think
Okay.
fundamentally, Rob, you are using statements within the Quran that we would argue, because of evidence, overwhelming evidence, come from a divine source. Overwhelming evidence come from a preserved divine source. And Rob, to be perfectly honest, and you've accepted this in the past, you don't have that perfectly preserved divine source. You've accepted that. So you can claim that these stories are believed to be fake, but in reality, because you don't know what is and is not fake, there's no certainty there. It's just an assessment that's been made. And often, as we are quite aware, the very construction of the Bible itself was not about, let's go to the earliest manuscripts and let's see what they're saying, and we'll include those. In fact, we have the exact topsy-turvy event happening, which is that often many of the very late manuscripts were actually used, and they trumped the earliest manuscripts that you had. So the point here is, Rob, you cannot start measuring things if you have a faulty ruler yourself and then assume that it's actually perfect in its assessment and in its ability to be the overlooker, the checker, the verifier. I think at best, Rob, you can say these are our opinions of what actually happened. We're not sure. We don't have evidence, isnad, going right back to the source, but this is what we believe. And because it disagrees with what you believe, I'm going to accept what I believe and what I have. And to be honest, Rob, with all due respect, we would say that the Quran has substantial amounts of evidence, overwhelming evidence, for its being a revelation from God and then being preserved as well. And so, Rob, we don't care if somebody comes up and says, well, we think these stories were these hundreds of years old, thousands of years old stories, which we have no way of verifying whether they were true or not. But we're just going to basically, because we don't accept them, we're going to actually judge your scripture by them. We don't have to accept that. But anyway, Rob, thanks for coming on, and I'm sure we'll get in the future. Okay, bye-bye.
Yep.